Hey guys, it's Kevin, my review for Dora and the Lost City of Gold. And what Dora and the Lost City of Gold is essentially about is we center on, well, Dora the Explorer, but she is now grown up, but she spent all of her childhood in the jungle pretty much, so unlike most people, she hasn't really developed that much, and she still has that childlike, whimsical personality, and that's fine until she has to go to high school, where she is very much ridiculed for it, while also meeting up with her cousin, Diego, and very quickly they are all, while she's on a field trip one day, her, Diego, and two other classmates are thrown into this scenario where basically they find out that her parents have been kidnapped. They now have to team up with this guy, Alejandro, and go back to the jungle to rescue her parents, and also Dora trying to get accustomed to being an adult and things like that, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Dora and the Lost City of Gold overall, I mean, I was dreading this movie. I hated the idea that this was a thing. I thought it was so bizarre. The second that it was announced, I just thought it was such a weird idea. And Dora the Explorer, don't get me wrong, this was a show that I loved as a kid. I did watch it pretty consistently. It was definitely a show that I had on quite a lot, but it is one of those shows where upon revisiting it, it definitely does not hold up at all. It's one of those shows that is very much catered towards kids, and watching it through adult eyes, it's pretty much unwatchable. Like, I jokingly tried to watch an episode with my friends, and I tried to get through it as best as I could, but it was quite rough, let me tell you. So, going into this, I did not have the highest hopes. I thought that this was just a really dumb idea. I did not understand why this would ever be a thing, why anyone would want it to be a thing, and I was pretty much just dreading the hell out of it. To my surprise, though, while this isn't a good movie, it doesn't suck, actually. This is a watchable film, surprisingly. Again, it's not good. I would not at all categorize it as a good film, but it definitely is alright for the most part. There are things in there that do sort of work, and we'll get into it right now, starting off with the cast. And surprisingly, that's one of the things that work really well in this film. This cast is far more committed than I ever could have imagined them to be. I think mostly everyone does do a really good job, especially when it comes to Isabela Moner, who I have to say was never a worry of mine. I've always really liked her as an actress, going as far back as, like, Transformers: The Last Night. I've always liked her. I've always thought that she's a bright spot, even in bad movies like that one. And so, coming into this film, I had a feeling she would be one of the bright spots, but she's way better than I ever could have imagined. She completely embodies the childlike whimsy of Dora, someone who is just so excited about adventuring, someone who just really loves the idea of learning things, and because of that, it's honestly kind of infectious. You really do see just how much fun Moner is having here, and she was far more committed than I really was expecting, and she also gave Dora a surprising amount of depth that we really didn't get to see in the TV show because, well, it was a half-hour format. It was catered towards preschoolers, whereas this, while it is very much, they're also trying to develop Dora a little bit more, and I did actually thought she did a really good job. You understand why Dora is the way she is, and I thought Moner overall really carried this film quite well. She is far and away probably the best thing about this entire film. Way better than I ever could have imagined, and even scenes that could have come across as really cringy, she really does pull off here. She was far better than I was really expecting. And the same goes for Eugenio Derbez. I was not expecting anything from him, but he does a really good job, really just embracing the campiness of this role. You can tell he's having the time of his life here. Alejandro is a pretty insane character, but I actually thought he did do a pretty good job here for sure. I was overall very impressed by him. Someone else who definitely surprised me that I did not think was going to be good at all was Jeffrey Wahlberg as Diego, who I thought did a really great job contrasting his, Dora's whimsical attitude with his much more normal and just sort of monotone sort of attitude. It actually worked quite well. You can see how much Diego has changed, and the chemistry between these two is actually really good. It's honestly one of my favorite things about the entire film, and I think these two work very well together overall. Far better than I really could have imagined, and I wasn't really expecting anything from him, but I thought he did a pretty decent job here. As far as the rest of the cast goes, everyone else does do a really good job. Eva Longoria, Michael Peña are very good for what they have. You can tell they're definitely having a really fun time. Someone else who was far more committed was Benicio del Toro as Swiper. The second that he was casted, I'm sure everyone was like, this is a very strange casting choice. Why would you ever do such a thing? But he's actually really good. You can tell he's having a lot of fun in this role, and I actually really liked him here. He brought far more charisma and just far more energy than I really was expecting, and really embodied just the really just sneakiness, but also the quirkiness of Swiper, and I thought he was just a lot of fun here for sure. The only two performances that just didn't really work for me in this movie, and I don't know if it's because they're newcomers or they just didn't gel that well, I thought. Well, one of them was Nicholas Coombe as a character of Randy. They try to make this guy the comic relief, and it just didn't really work, but especially Madeleine as the character of Sammy was just really annoying to me. I thought that she was really playing up just the mean girl type stereotype, and it just didn't really work. I thought that the four of them did have decent chemistry, but these two were very easily the weakest link in the cast, and they just did not work as well as I think they could have. But like I said, considering that I wasn't really expecting anything, this cast actually did do a really good job for the most part. They put a lot more effort into this than I was expecting, and I definitely will give them props for that. Now let's get to the directing and the writing, because the directing, here's where we get into some of my more negatives with the film. Now, while I do think that James Bobin overall did a good job retaining the spirit of Dora, just that, like I said, just fun and adventurous feel that the original series did have, I don't think his tone was as good as it could have been. There are times where the film is very kiddie, and it's clearly trying to cater towards those that are currently watching Dora, or maybe they haven't seen Dora, and it does a good job with that. It definitely knows its target audience, but then there are points where it's trying to be a bit more sophisticated, getting more into the teen life of Dora, and how she has to grow up and things like that, and just the balance is not the best there. You know, there are points where you'll have some really great meta jokes, but then you'll have some, like, poop joke or a fart joke, and it just doesn't balance as well as it could have. So, again, the directing here is better than I was expecting. James Bobin clearly does have some passion here, and he definitely does know what made the series great. But I also felt like his directing, just his tone was not as good as it could have been. He needed to decide, did he want this to be a more sophisticated version of Dora, or was he trying to make this, you know, childlike and fun like the original series? And I just don't think that balance struck as well as it could have. And same goes for the writing here. There are some things in the writing that I really do like, and I'll just tell you right now, all of it involves Dora and Diego. I thought that stuff was brilliantly handled. Very early on in the film, we get to see a young Dora and Diego and them having this adventure together, but then Diego having to say goodbye, him having to depart because he's growing up, you know, he's moved on, and, you know, seeing Dora approach Diego and him not being as into what she's doing, I actually did think was really well done. You get the sense that, you know, while Diego does care about his cousin, and Dora is his best friend in that way, he also feels embarrassed by her, and he doesn't want her to feel like she is just this laughing stock, which obviously Dora doesn't see it that way because she's such a positive, you know, free spirit attitude in that sense. But I thought that that bond was actually really good, and it was probably my favorite part of this movie writing-wise. And all the stuff in the high school with seeing Dora trying to acclimate, but it's really not working out. There's also a really good amount of just self-aware humor that I wasn't... The film also has a surprisingly very heavy amount of self-aware humor. You know, the humor that we know that Dora is a little bit off. The thing like you saw in the trailer where Dora is talking to the cameras, there are more scenes like that in this movie than I really was expecting. There's a really clever gag where they are at this party and they all have to dress up as a celebrity. But because Dora has been in the jungle and she isn't very well accustomed to modern day culture, when she sees the word dress as a star, she literally thinks it means dress as a star. And stuff like that, I really did get a kick out of. And again, seeing Dora have to acclimate, I actually did think was very entertaining. And I was like, wow, this could actually be a really good movie. I'm actually really enjoying what's happening here. And then once we transition into the jungle, it didn't completely dip in quality, but it just wasn't as good. It felt like it catered more to that kiddie crowd, and it just did not work as well for me. It was definitely starting to lose me a bit. The Dora and Diego dynamic, that very much did stay, and I actually did appreciate the character of Alejandro more than I really was expecting, but once we get into that jungle, it just isn't nearly as interesting, and I don't think they did as good of a job with that. The adventure they're going on, you've seen it done 1,000 times before. It's just her having to, her having to rescue her parents and things like that, and they go through all these different, sort of locations and things like that. And again, they do some good stuff with showing how Dora is more well-equipped in the jungle than some of them are, but a lot of that does very much fade away, and they resort to humor where Dora sings about pooping. Literally, she sings about pooping, and I wish I was making this up, but there's a whole song where that happens, and it's very strange. But again, then they'll have that more, sophisticated humor, and that's why I'm saying it doesn't balance as well as it could have. So again, the movie's just, there were parts where I definitely was entertained. Even stuff in the jungle I was entertained by for sure. There were definitely some scenes that I thought were really good, but it definitely did start to wear off. It also didn't help that there were some characters that just did not work at all, especially the characters of Randy and Sammy. These two, I just did not really think I didn't really feel like they fit in this movie. It didn't really feel like they knew what to do with them other than they're just walking stereotypes. Randy is just, kind of like the dumbass of the group who's just saying a lot of stupid things, and clearly they're just trying to make him like the comedic, relief or whatever, and it just isn't really, not necessarily comedic relief, because it is a comedic, fun film, but he has the most lines, comedy-wise, and it just doesn't really work as well. And then the character of Sammy, what they do with her, it just doesn't really work. She starts off and she doesn't really like Dora at all. She finds her very annoying. And then there's a point in the film where all of a sudden she's just okay with it, and she suddenly embraces Dora's eccentricities in that way. And again, I appreciate the film going with this message of being yourself and not trying to change yourself just to adapt to your surroundings in that way. And I like that we see that. And Dora herself, very very early on, she says she's not going to change because this is who she is. And I do think that's a good message. But the way it's done here, it just didn't really make a lot of sense. It felt like one moment Sammy just couldn't stand Dora, nearly hated her, and then all of a sudden she felt bad for her. And I felt like there was a whole scene missing where these two should have had a conversation or something, and it just never really happened. And it felt very kind of underwritten in that way. It was very, very strange overall. Maybe I'm the only one that felt that way, but it felt like they could have done a better job with that overall. So that didn't really work for me. And like I said, other stuff just here and there, the story, it did not feel as cohesive as it should have. There's also a twist that is very predictable and just didn't really, it wasn't very surprising at all, and I don't think they did as well with that. Also, the rules of the jungle aren't as clear as they should be. It's hard to tell sometimes if they're trying to do that, oh, this is all in Dora's head, or this is actually happening. And after a certain point, you kind of see where they're going, and it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. And there's one thing that really did bother me, though. I know there's a lot of things I shouldn't pick apart too much because it is just trying to be a kid's movie, and it does a good job with that. But there's one logic problem that really did kind of bother me throughout the film. So, as you guys know, Danny Trejo was casted as Boots, but he really doesn't do much in the film. In fact, him talking is nothing more than really just a voice cameo that could have potentially been the funniest scene in the movie, but because of the fact that they announced that he was going to be in the film, it's not really all that funny because you're kind of expecting it. So yeah, Boots doesn't talk very much, yet Swiper, who is a fox, and also looks similar to Boots, he talks in full sentences. He's like almost a part of the humans. He's like working with the villains in this movie, and it just doesn't really work. I didn't really understand, like, how is Swiper able to talk, but Boots only talks sometimes. It just, that was bothering me a little bit. So yeah, the writing overall, it's very on and off. There's some things I like, some things I don't like, and that's really the best way to sum it up. The cinematography here is actually really good. I think in terms of the world building, they definitely did do a very good job with that. The various locations they go into are actually really thrilling. There are definitely some that I was definitely getting into and I thought were pretty creative in that sense, and I thought they did a good job with that overall. There's also one scene in particular that, if you are a fan of Dora, which again, I mean, I was as a kid, I think you'll get a real kick out of it. I'm not going to say what they do, but I actually thought it was really creative and probably the funniest scene in the entire film, and I had a really good time with that for sure. So I think if you're a fan of Dora, even if you just watched it as a kid, I think you'll really appreciate what they do with that. But overall, the cinematography is good, minus the visual effects, which, yeah, they're not the greatest. The film definitely does feel quite low budget in that way. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a film that was originally supposed to be like a TV movie and then it ended up in theaters, because I'm not saying the visual effects are like terrible or anything, but they're not very good either. They definitely could have been a little bit better, and they just weren't that great. Those Swiper and Boots fit a lot more organically into this than I was expecting. I was expecting them to feel just like special effects, but I actually thought they fit in pretty well, and I didn't really have that much of an issue with them. So I thought that worked out pretty well. And the action sequences in this film, some of them work and some of them don't. Like, there's a really thrilling action scene underwater that I actually thought was really well done. But then there are scenes that you've seen 100 times before, like car chases and things like that, where it just seems like they're trying to be like Indiana Jones, and it just doesn't work as well. I think kids are going to get a real kick out of it, but if you've seen any other adventure film, you'll probably just want to watch that instead of the action scenes here. They're nothing that impressive overall. The score here I thought was alright for the most part, and the editing, like I said, I think this film was a little bit underwritten. There were definitely some things that felt a little bit cut out. The film definitely did feel a little bit choppy in that sense, and I think they could have done a better job with some things, especially in the second act. I thought it was really dragging overall, and I think definitely they could have cut some stuff down there. Ultimately, Dora and the Lost City of Gold, it is not the train wreck that we all expect it to be. It's an average film at best. It has a really good message in there for kids. I think for kids that like Dora and things like that, they're really going to get a real kick out of it. It does understand the Dora, legacy pretty well. It does have some nods in there that I think people are really going to appreciate for sure. Isabela Moner does a fabulous job as Dora, way better than I ever could have imagined for sure. I thought that some of the action sequences were really good, and I actually did think there was some clever humor in there. It is well-intentioned. There's a lot more heart in there than I was really expecting, but at the end of the day, it just isn't really a film that stuck with me all that much. And I mean, upon walking out of the theater, I started to forget details about this movie, and that alone just told me that I really did not like this all that much. So at the end of the day, I am going to give Dora and the Lost City of Gold a C+. So overall, guys, in my review of Dora and the Lost City of Gold, the most you guys saw this movie overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.